The method for determining the winner of an election that you're probably most familiar with is called the plurality method. What this method does is it looks for the candidate who got the plurality of first place votes, and that candidate is determined the winner of the election. Now, this method has many problems. The first is that if there are more than two candidates, it's very possible for a candidate to have the plurality of the first place votes, but not the majority. Now, the plurality means that they have the most, but to have a majority, you need to have more than 50% of the first place votes. So it is possible to have someone win an election where the winner was determined using the plurality method that the majority of voters do not actually support. Now, another problem that occurs as a result of the plurality method is the problem of insincere voters. You've likely had a conversation with someone that went something like, you have to vote for the Democratic or the Republican candidate for president because voting for a third party is just throwing your vote away. And this person is encouraging you to potentially be an insincere voter. Now, what insincere voters do is they know that their candidate that they would prefer has no chance at winning an election, and so they instead vote for their second or third or fourth choice candidate, whoever is their top choice of the candidates who are most likely to win the election. So we see this in American presidential elections where we have a Democratic and a Republican candidate, and they take the majority of the votes every time, with the third parties rarely getting more than 1 or 2%. So we can actually look at the history of presidential elections, and we can identify many times where if the third party candidates hadn't been in the election, the opposite candidate may have won. Or times when the third party candidates, if people had voted true to their beliefs and their preferences, the third party candidates would have gotten more votes than they did. So when we decide the winner of an election using the plurality method, we're opening ourselves up to manipulation through insincere voting. Every voting method has this weakness that insincere voters can manipulate the outcome. However, the plurality method is especially susceptible to this. A final problem with the plurality method is we might have a candidate who is preferred over all other candidates if we match them up head to head, and that person doesn't necessarily win the election. Now, the candidate who is preferred by the majority of voters when we match them up head to head against every other candidate, that candidate is called a Condorcet candidate. So we can think of that final problem with the plurality method being that the Condorcet candidate is not always the winner of the election. So thinking about this preference schedule that we developed, if I wanted to know who the plurality candidate was, all I'm going to look at is the row that represents my first place votes. So I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to look at how many did they get. So A is in first place only in this first column, so A has 14 votes. B is in first place only in the second column, so B, we get 4 votes. C is in first place only in the third column, so C gets 11 votes. And D is in first place only in the fourth column, so D has 8 votes. So if I'm determining the plurality winner, the plurality candidate, A wins the election, even though A does not have the majority of the votes.